Afternoon, everybody. We're back for episode 4 of the Intrado Way. And today we're talking with Terry Miles and Sue Adelmann. Terry is the Director of Portfolio Delivery at Intrado. Terry, why don't you give a brief introduction and tell us how it's going in Intrado?
Absolutely. Intrado is a company that has for many years been acquiring organizations. We were a holding company, and we have relatively recently gone through a series of acquisitions currently held by Apollo Capital Management Group. And all of these work in the context of trying to turn ourselves from a holding company into an operating company, and maybe more specifically, a software company. And these podcast episodes represent stories from that transformation, a business transformation that touches all realms, technical, procedural, how we engage with customers, and so forth.
Great. And Terry's been instrumental in introducing, the industry to the folks inside of Intrado. So today we're talking to Sue Adelmann, VP of Product Management for Customer Experience Portfolio. Sue, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me here. It's a great subject and a great topic, and Terry's been great at helping us understand how to, enter these kinds of conversations. So I really appreciate you guys. I'm a longtime software engineering, software development, product management person. So I've been in the software engineering business for about 37 years, started as an engineer, switched over to a marketing side for a decade, and then kind of the pendulum swung back in the middle into product management. So I've been here at Intrado for 3.5 years in a product management capacity, working with our notification and messaging platforms through all this change. And it's been an awesome journey.
Fantastic. Well, I was so excited to be able to talk to you because Terry points out, hey, we're doing business transformation. The term digital transformation has been left behind now, and it's business transformation. And so the first question is, what's your point of view as VP of Product on business transformation?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different lenses that I could take on answering that question. And I think classically in a technology business, product management is that place that sits between the goals, the financial goals and outcomes desired by the business unit and the engineering, approach to get there. So we're that place in the middle that balances both of those things. And especially in a time of change, understanding, when to pull one lever and not to over pull so that, you really are still achieving business goals. In a time of transformation, those business goals become very specific. Having those very specific business goals is a necessary driver to that change.
Interesting.
And then understanding, how to really lead with the technology at the same time. So it's a really interesting balance. You're really doing innovation on both of those fronts, and yet still doing the classic product management dance of trying to balance, the business point of view and the technology point of view.
That's an interesting perspective. So would you, as a product management leader, do you now start building in, hey, a third of my time is going to be what? Improving process. Do you think about a continual process improvement model then?
I think that happens, necessarily. It's not like there's just a time that we're going to build process. I think the process improvement happens continually.
Yeah.
I've been aligned, for example, to, I think, 7 different managers and teams throughout this last couple year period. So, yeah. It's been different processes. It's been adjusting those processes. It's been different people. It's been, rebuilding each time. I mean, you get some improvement, you retrospect what you're doing, and you say, what do we need to tweak and what do we need to change? So certainly process is a lot of it. A third of the time, I think it's baked in everything that we do, and it's just allowing for those regular moments, not just among small groups, but among a variety of different, in the hierarchy of the organization. So local teams, higher level work groups, business work groups, technology groups, all of those things have to be attuned to the goals that we're going after, the goals that are changing, and the processes that support them, and the processes that are changing. Yeah, I think of it as a really complicated dance, but a really interesting and fun one.
Yeah. I the way you guys do it, it's especially interesting, fun. So one of the things about this series of episodes is we're trying to figure out how, if you're a technology executive, imagine a peer out there in the world, and she wants to push this, but she doesn't have agreement, or it's not that there's disagreement. It's just everyone thinks it's a good idea, but no one will fund it, or no one will, sign up for the whole thing. What advice would you give to that person for peer executives? How do you get them on board?
I think it requires boldness at the top, and setting some bold goals and statements, because maybe some that are even risky and that you don't know that you can achieve. But if you don't have some really bold outcome in line of sight, it's very difficult, I think, to get people to align around something. You can't just do it organically, with little tweaks. You really need to have a bold goal and vision, and have people commit to that goal, and not fight it, but be all in on it. And it has to be big enough and bold enough that people are willing to take that plunge with you.
Yeah,
that's what we did. I think that was an instrument in our success, was being able to have some bold goals, having no room for dissent. We all got aligned.
Yeah.
And we all supported each other to get there.
Yeah. It's extremely rare, right? It's extremely rare to find at a customer the kind of, not just, hey, we're all row in the same direction. It's like, and our lives are in this lifeboat, and the place we're going to is radically better than the place we left. Like,
it's hard to have courage. It's hard to be willing to really be brave and have courage, and take a risk with your career, take a risk with your company, take a risk with all of it. But you really have to. You have to be willing to.
Yeah. How did you choose to take these risks? You personally had to choose to do that.
Yeah, I think I probably am comfortable as a risk taker. So I kind of come with a DNA that made that easier for me maybe than some people. But it's just, agreeing and then measuring as you go at each moment, right? So you say, this is where I want to get. And every day and every week and every month, you're measuring, how's it going? Am I getting there? What does it feel like? What do I need to change? I think if you are working in an organization, having that trust among your associates, your peers, and your teams is really important, because you can't really watch your back while you're taking big steps forward. So that's a really important ingredient, and that was true in our culture here. We had people who said, we understand that we're pushing really hard, and that this is going to break some things, and go forward. So getting that kind of camaraderie and support and just environment of trust, I think is pretty important too.
Yeah. Yep. Well, there isn't much to say past that, because I think you have to create that if you're going to do anything. And yeah. Well, let's talk.
One catalyst I'd offer is a common expression of pain. You often change because you get tired of the way things are. Mm-hmm. And by the time a lot of this business started to take on this adventure, we had all come to a general agreement of what hurt the most. And we were increasingly starting to express it in common ways. And it could be something as abstract, not abstract, but just, hard to quantify, as just low morale and exhaustion, and people not doing their jobs as well as they used to because they just had too much to do and they felt like they were just doing everything inefficiently. Yep. But it wasn't hard to find agreement on what hurt, and that allowed us to start figuring out what to commit to.
Yeah.
And I think that clarity of communication as well, Terry, during that period of time, just being really clear for people to understand, what were we trying to do? How are we going to get there? What words are we using? Does everybody understand what those words mean? There were lots of communications that came out at every level that kind of repeated and made it very clear, a couple crisp points of, this is what we're marching to try to achieve.
Let's talk about, I have questions about the frequency of communication. How every week, every month, every year, how many years are you doing that communication over?
What do you think? A year and a half now? Terry?
Yeah, it's been a year and a half where I think the dialogue has really gotten crystallized. I think 2 years ago, there would be small pockets that were having this conversation. But I think it's been broadly socialized, the need for change and the general structures of those changes, because it hasn't just been one.
No.
Parallel initiatives that are more or less complementary, all trying to do that same basic case of become more efficient by standardizing what we do so that we can become more productive and really go kick butt.
Yeah.
I think go ahead.
Well, go ahead, Sue.
I think that communication happens in a lot of different ways, right? So it's hierarchical and it's different messages. It's what's in it for me messages to each type of audience and group, right? What's in it for me? What has to change? And what do I have to do? And I think all of that with some support for, some of the processes and organizational, supports that need to be there to make that kind of change. So, how we measure ourselves, what we're budgeting to, what we're creating goals to. I mean, all that had to kind of come together at the same time. And so pretty constant communication from an executive level, cascading down to, a managerial level and operational level to our local teams. Not that we had to repeat the same words at every moment, but we did have to pull back in and, repeat, here's how we're doing, here's how we're doing, here's why we're doing it, here's what a scorecard looks like.
Nice.
You had to really do a lot of levels.
I would observe quarterly, monthly, and more or less weekly or sprintly rhythms that go in there too. That the quarterly would be the big picture stuff, quarterly business reviews that might happen with a series of service providers. We have several of those that go on. There's town halls that senior leaders have. And that's another way to get the message out. The sprint rhythms, 1, 2, 3 week, depending on what you're doing, are kind of obvious. That's a method of communicating back to the business what they're doing. And then somewhere in between, a lot of team meetings, functionally specific, more or less. But those rhythms are probably familiar to any company. So the rhythm's not unusual. It's just that I think we've done a pretty good job of getting those conversations to respond to one another.
Yeah, I would highlight that you're also very consistent. Almost no one has a 5-year plan here. People start digital transformation, business transformation, and they just don't know they don't know that it's a very long journey. They don't know how they're going to win, right? And so they don't want to take a 5-year journey if there's no wins on it until the end of 5 years. But yeah, you guys said we're going to the moon, and you packed for going to the moon, and you built a rocket to go to the moon, and you went to the moon, and here's what we do when we get to the moon. It just is so well planned. This leads. Go ahead, Sue.
I was going to say, I think there's one element of it too that pretty early on we realized this was a conversation also we needed to have with our customers.
Oh.
That there would be time when we were, changing what our focus was and wanted them to understand the vision at a higher level as well. And so not just tactical delivery, but the long-term innovation pieces. And that was something that we wove into those conversations as well.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a whole other series. As I talk to folks at Intrado, there's these whole other episode series that comes out. That's a lot of, you have to think a lot about how to communicate with customers. That's a fundamentally different thing. So would love to hear more about that. I'll try to stay out of that rabbit hole today. Because we're really after how do you get to big structural things that will support a 5-year journey? So let's go right away to your org agreements around product management models. So do you have an org agreement? Do you let people do whatever? How does that work?
Well, so as Terry mentioned, we were a holding company previously. So I don't know how many companies came together at the beginning of this journey, but it was, more than single digits, right?
Yeah.
And so very many practices, different practices. And so, our first act was to, even before we started, it was to take a stock of what were our best practices? How much variation did we have among the way we ran a product management organization in all aspects of it, from our intake to our development cadence, to our style of development, to our measuring on the out end of life, and all the end of life, our full software development life cycle. So we found that we had many different approaches to doing things. But when we pulled together a core team of people to do this, we really found that, there's a lot of commonality at the base of each of those things. And I think we had a good group of people working on it, and a group of people who were willing to get to the essence of what was most important and not fight for the little details. And really try to come up with some common patterns. And the first stage was really understanding and valuing what is a product. And we have all these products. We have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of products.
Yeah.
And that's probably not what we want in the end.
That's hard. So, high number of SKUs is hard. Yeah.
So really coming up with some common language and definitions and ways of inventorying the assets that we have and valuing the assets we have, ways of measuring how we're investing in them, ways of, how they fit into our our overall strategic plan and goals, which are very different from the individual 100 different strategic, sets of goals that we had a month prior. So, it was coming together of that understanding of what we have and where we're going to focus. And I think that probably took us most of a year to try to take that inventory. And it wasn't that work stopped. It was just that we continued to build on our product catalog and our definitions and our measurement processes, our intake and, governance processes, our budgeting processes, our end of life criteria.
Yes. Many of those things no one has a plan for in anything either, right? So and for a lot of folks who I deal with, they don't have end of life plans. There's no one who says, hey, the basic, go ahead, Terry.
You're totally ringing my bell. Here's one data point. If you look at our architectural inventory of our business, they'll count about 850 application assets. There's more than that. There's some acquisitions that aren't fully, counted, but it's about like that. There's about 125 revenue generating products sitting in a list right now. If you look at that list of about 850, there's about 300 of them that we would call end of life or going towards ends of life or inactive retirement. I know that about 100 of those have been identified as applications to end of life because they were confronted with a replatforming initiative like PCF.
Yep.
That it flushed the bushes and got a lot of things to fall to the ground. And that process, moreover, and again, this is a tactic I'd recommend to our audience, even if you don't know what's going to happen, just do the simple exercise of trying to map every single thing your development teams call an app, connect it to your products. It's going to be a many-to-many relationship if you're of any size at all.
Yep.
But just do that mapping and then see what you think looks weird, because you might end up sunsetting a bunch of things, doing a platform consolidation. Your strategic imperatives might come from just that simple exercise right there of figuring out how everything connects.
Yeah, awesome.
Well, one thing that helped us through that process that might help people as well is when you're doing something like this on your own, your judgment about what is good, what is a good product, a market-worthy product, can be very different than when you line yourself up with peers and maybe hold yourself under a little bit of a different light. So in our case, it was doing this across business lines. You could do this with other companies, benchmarking. It's what we thought was good, what I thought was good in my little world. Yeah, $1 million product line, for example, didn't hold up in a bigger picture. And so you're really just forcing yourself to take a step back and say, and define what your goals are and what good is, which make you more able to make some uncomfortable decisions to cut things or invest and focus differently that you might not have made before. So, I mean, as Terry talked about it from the pivotal, the technology platform goodness, there were a lot of elements of goodness, financial goodness, technology growth goodness, ability to support, invest in economically, all those things.
Yeah.
It's getting our app teams in touch with how money gets spent. It's letting them understand themselves as cost centers, and it's giving product a better lens back into how the money's getting spent and how that breaks down better than it used to.
Yeah. I mean, the overall profitability of a piece of software seems like a critical missing. Most of the world is just like, oh my gosh, software is 100 times more efficient than the paper process. Just take the value. But I think we've reached the point where there's no paper processes left to compare yourself to. And now it's just like, well, okay, how am I relative? Is $1 million for 30% overhead costs, is that worth the same $1 million that's for 10% overhead costs? Well, clearly no. And how do we think about that? And do we need to adjust that? So you said one other thing I want to make sure we can get into, which is, I asked this question and the answer for Intrado is, hey, everyone at the top level agreed, but you spent a year like consolidating product management practices. And of course they do boil down to roughly the same set of things. Do you have any advice for how someone who doesn't have a well-aligned organization would start that alignment process? Can you do this part way? how would you do it if you didn't have your perfect storm you've got at Intrado?
Well, I will say, I don't know that everyone actually agreed. I would say that I was even a skeptic of some things in the beginning. So, and so what tipped me? What tipped me was, being willing to trust and have some faith, right? And allow something that is different to start, and then use my judgment as time went by as to whether, this was working. And I think it helped to have a voice both ways, to have a voice in it. So I guess what I would coach other people where you don't have alignment, listen, it's all your empathy skills, right? It's put a vision out there, listen to how other people react to that vision, listen to their voice and weave their voice into where you're going, right? Yep. And allow them to not necessarily buy in, but, try to get that handshake for, if I deliver, will you believe, right. Will you believe to this point? Yeah. And, you have to listen. You can't just have a singular vision that other people don't understand and doesn't consider other people's points of view. So I think that was done, and that pulled me in, right? That it was not presented as a you must. It was presented as a we will. What do you think? It wasn't optional, but it was considerate and it was empathetic, and it took in advice and points of views of different stakeholders who needed to make this work.
Yeah, awesome. Like, I've mentioned it in a couple of the other episodes, but there's a book by Cotter called Accelerate, not the DevOps Accelerate book, but the book that talks about how do you construct a network to solve these problems that can't be solved by the silos. And so any listeners who are looking at this, that's a clear model for doing what you're doing. And it has this involvement aspect. We have a problem we can't solve with our current structure. Like, okay, well, then let's acknowledge that and move to solving this with a network structure. So, yeah, it's fantastic. All right.
People change when they're engaged. They're engaged when they see relevancy, interest, and control in the content.
All right, let's hit that again. They engage when they see change?
People change when they're engaged. And people are engaged when they think something has relevancy, interest, and impact, that they can control it. And then those are the building blocks of engagement. Engagement is the main building block of change.
Well, there you go. There you go. I didn't know that. I love your wisdom, Terry. It slots in perfectly, totally consonant with what I've ever experienced, but I've never had the articulated vision of it. So thanks for that.
Well, Sue gets me because she, like me, was an instructional design nerd. We spent a lot of time in education.
The super secret stealth advantage is this instructional design business.
Yes, we are happy imposters in technology.
Oh, well, how many instructional design people are out there? How many, let's at least touch that. If I wanted to go hire an instructional design person to help me, how many are there? What's a good program? What's a good program by region?
I personally, I'm an alumnus of it, but I picked it because I thought it was an awesome school, Indiana University. If you want something more entry level, out in the West Coast, there's a really strong baccalaureate program at Cal State Chico up there. Wow. They turn them out, and those guys come out with bachelors, and they're pretty good. Huh. You could also go to Florida State University. If you're going to go to the East Coast, they've been around and highly credentialed and doing great stuff since forever. And you could always get someone smart at Stanford, right? Yeah, those guys are just, place is lousy with them.
Yeah.
But instructional design is just, you teach people stuff you don't know. That's the job. And so that inherently teaches you about how to apply and carry empathy with other people. I think that's the reason why that particular skill has just been valuable to me.
Yeah.
And Tony, I would say this is a thing that's never done, right? So our software process, I mean, we're still evolving every month, every day. We have teams of people that are still, tweaking and improving and deciding, sharing best practices. Yeah, it's never done.
Yeah. That's the other thing, is to recognize that you're engaging in a process. You're not engaging in there might be a North Star, but that North Star is not technically reachable. It's just where the process grinds toward. Yeah. You want to plug your alma mater?
No, moi? No.
Do you
No,
want to plug your school?
Design side. Well, the instructional design side, actually, I learned on the fly working with K-12 schools for a decade, working in the K-12 education software space. So
Ah, yeah.
I'm actually going to, have that history. I'm a hack in that regard, but,
Yeah.
you pick up what you can.
Yeah. Product managers, the best grad school is working. Yeah.
Kind of like that. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, how about this? How about your general take on product management? See if we can get back to, when you get to choose product management models for people, what do you choose?
So I don't think there is a single model. So I'm not gonna profess anybody's model, although all of them sort of play into, sort of classic, everything from pragmatic to agile to, there are a lot of parts and pieces that are similar. There are a lot of things that you need to tweak yourself. So I don't think that I could speak to a named model other than, having a software development lifecycle that's in tune, that puts customer first, that stays in tight loops with customers and keeps customers at the center of what you're doing. That's agile. I think it has to, agile and lean are a big part of it. I think we've just proven that if you want to really be economical with money and deliver what's closest to actually being valuable to customers most quickly, that those models work best. From a managing product perspective, layering the business of product on top of those technical development approaches,
yep.
You have to get both of those things at the same time, right? So I don't know that there's one model that gets it exactly right. It's just being very aware of the business impact of everything you're doing, being very close and tight to your customers, not, doing a bunch of artifact type paper design and requirements, well in advance, trying to do it in the moment.
Yeah. Well, so you hit on a super important thing. One of the things that we see in the field is it's extremely hard for the business to move into, let's just call it the same language space as the development and operations teams. And so how do you think about that? You have a line of business, not necessarily technical. People are probably technical because in your business, it's all technical, but there's a line of business person who really just has some bottom line concerns. Hey, I need to deliver this to this many people for under this amount at this level of.
So there are tools and methods that have helped us. So Scaled Agile Safe is probably the one that comes to mind, where we've used a language and started to have a language of when we bring together business folks with technical folks to figure out what it is that we're going to do, how we measure what we do, and more importantly, what we don't do. So, the business side is aligning that to value delivered to market and to financial outcomes. The technical side is, aligning it to resources and costs and timelines. And I think that's a methodology that's helped those folks come together on a regular basis to say, yep, we got a handshake, we're all in this together.
Great,
so
yeah.
That's been helping us from a language perspective and from just a common view perspective.
Yeah, that's a real accomplishment. I have many customers where the product team actively hate and are contemptuous of the technical teams, and it's just almost unbelievable. And so, yeah, looking for ways to help people out of those kinds of binds.
I think, product management, the classic part of product management, there are different flavors, right? So product managers can have a very heads-up point of view. Software development companies and product managers that came from software development backgrounds tend to have a much more heads-down view, and really it's that handshake between the 2 points of view that helps you bridge those people, those cultures, those languages, those needs.
Yeah.
And I think we've always tried to, have both of those. I think we've been most successful with organic product lines that have both of those skill sets pretty closely tied together, and not too much, completely heads up business or completely heads down building, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Have any of your BUs been just like only finance focused, such that they're really not interested in engaging in conversations about innovation or even using better product management? Any cases like that?
Well, you're always very financially driven, right? So you may make decisions to, to starve something, to stop working on something that people hold very, dear to their heart and that are very difficult decisions to make. But you're making that decision because you're feeding something else, because your goals are bigger and you're intentionally trying to use your resources in the right way. So I don't think it's just financial in a vacuum. It's taking a financial point of view towards specific goals.
Yeah.
And being willing to do what it takes to move the levers you have to get to those goals.
Yeah.
So I think there are differences in whether you're developing organic software or you're reselling other people's software. I mean, you can go to market with product in a lot of different ways, and those are some differences.
Huh. And so organic here means you wrote it internally? Is that how you mean it?
Yeah, it's code that we manage or in some way, contribute to, but typically manage, develop, right? As opposed to reselling other people's stuff. Reseller business models are a mix of part of this, right? So you're always, building and buying and partnering, and you have this big mix of things that you're bringing to market quite often.
Huh. I never thought about that distinction. Most folks that we're working with are writing their own software. So interesting. Is there anything that you do differently when you're running someone else's software?
You look at the where you put resources, and you don't forget that you still have to do a lot of things that you might otherwise not resource the right way. So just because you're not building it doesn't mean you're not supporting it, and you're not evaluating it the right way, and you're not making sure customers are successful with it. So I think you learn the core of all of it when you're building software, and you just have to remember many of those pieces still apply when you're not.
Yeah. There's no such thing as freely integrated software, right?
No, never, sadly.
Free like lunch, free like puppy.
Right, free like puppy.
The latter.
Yeah, gosh, yeah. All right, well, so we've talked to Terry about touching a team. So you say, how do you do that? How many product management teams report to you, and how if team 36 is now ready to start talking about their models and cleaning this up and doing the handshakes. How do you do that process?
So I've had an interesting role in the organization. I've been incubating some business units, product lines, and I've moved around. So I've let go of some of my teams, right? So they've gotten to a certain stage where we've said, okay, this business, we've pulled it together, and now we maybe want to reshape it and mold it into a different trajectory. So we're gonna let it go. We're gonna change its structure and change its goal set. So I've had in and outs of a lot of different, and we've also done a bunch of acquisitions. So we're pulling in and we're moving out, and there's a lot of motion in my world. So I don't have a huge team right now. I have a fairly small team, and actually I have a team of product managers. Of only one of them actually has any product management experience. Oh. So I'm on a different journey right now to try to change what has been a custom development part of our business into a much more product oriented organization. So that's a different flavor of this whole kind of journey that is characterizing my days mostly right now. So
I can't resist asking, how do you train those people with no PM experience? How do you do it?
So the good news is this past year in developing, artifacts and process, we have a pretty good, strong collection and repository of best practices that we can share with people on evaluation of products, on go-to-market, on, development SDLC methodologies that people can fall into. You pair them with people who are more experienced and are at different maturity stages. So you let them listen in and be a part of conversations that maybe are product lines that they've never even talked to or seen, but at least give them the patterns and the rhythm and the language,
Yep. You pointed the pairing there, and it actually brings up this really weird thing. Everyone in IT my whole career has wanted to eliminate it's essentially an oral culture. Like what to do it's orally passed on, like, no, do it, because you have to sit there and do it, like, not like that, like this, blah, blah, blah. And you learn all along the way. Have you ever thought about that there's this oral culture you really have to do? Paperwork and memos won't cut it.
Absolutely. So I have a person, and you kind of have to look at each person individually. And I'm working with someone whose goal is to really be a COO someday. So, product management is a launching point to a lot of different places in an organization. And this is an individual who really likes the operational diversity and that you kind of see as a product manager. And he's, got a product he's managing. He's doing hardcore tactical, scrum work and releasing and doing all the right things from a product management perspective. But his interest is more broadly in organizational change and operational. So what do you do with that? Well, so we have chief of staff roles here. So we're a pretty big company. There's one COO. It's hard to say, how do you get to that job? Yeah. But you could maybe get to a COO job in a lot of different size companies and, maybe in a different way. So pairing him with people who are, like that. So you're pairing him with chief of staffs that are working with a business unit leader who are not really a COO, but have a bit of that, omniscient kind of operational role. Yeah. And so having him sit in on meetings. So, there's nothing formal about it other than look at how this works. Hear the talk, hear the talk, understand the interaction.
Yeah.
I
awesome.
think you can't do anything other than just create those experiences for people. So it's very, very valuable, I think.
Yeah. One of the assumptions in the thing you just said is that as a manager, you're actually trying to fulfill your staff member's career goal within the framework of what Intrado needs, but that you're actually doing that. You're actually saying, okay, you want to do that. Here's the 8 opportunities to traverse there.
Sure. Yeah. That's what we all should be doing, right? We all want to learn and grow and be something other than, what we know and learn today. So, yeah.
So yeah. I'm just going to tell you that, satisfying your staff members' overall career goal, even if it's only tangential to what you're doing, is not common practice. So is that just from your empathetic background? You're like, hey, everyone will succeed best when they're actually working on their own thing? What's your mind?
I'm not suggesting that we're deviating what that job description is at all. I'm just saying that there's an awful lot of work to do everywhere, right? We're all doing, long days that are we're backstopping other people, with less people. And so I think there's opportunity to stretch in a lot of different directions. And, it's just a matter of helping people stretch in directions that they can be most successful in. I always believe in the best and highest use principle, right? You want to have people working at their best and highest use. And within a product management job in particular, there's a lot of ability to stretch that, based on the type of product and the maturity of the product and the needs in the organization. So yeah, I don't think that's really a diversion from what the core job function is. It's just the flavor and the enrichment, the kind of the patina around it.
Yeah. Well, I just don't hear a lot of executives with that attitude towards staff members. And so I want to highlight that and make sure that if you're watching this, that an investment in staff is, well, let me just ask you, how important is the investment in staff to the business transformation in Intrado?
No, it's hugely important. I mean, it's hugely important. We've gone through a lot of change. We're a smaller company than we started, and those kinds of actions and changing workforce makeup are very, very difficult. But, you have to be able to trust people. You have to be able to empower people. You have to have people that want to work together and like to work together and genuinely care about each other to make this kind of change. It just doesn't happen without those characteristics. So it's important to listen to people, and it's important to help people grow and to remove obstacles, where you can, and to enlist them to try to help remove obstacles,
Yeah.
It's participation sport on every layer.
Instructional design, I'm a believer. It really just, it informs a point of view in all of this that is not oppositional. There's a great book from Chris Voss called Never Split the Difference. And one of his key things is about negotiation. His key thing is the problem is never your counterparty, it's the problem. The problem is the problem. And your organization has figured out that the problem is the problem and people are not the problem. And
yep.
It's great to see it even at that level of, coaching staff on a one-on-one, like what are you going to do? So appreciate hearing about that. Let's see, we got about 5 minutes left. And the last sort of big question I would ask you is, how do you goal, measure, establish KPIs? What secret handshakes do you look for a team to have catalyzed? These kinds of things. How do you know when a team is going well and when it's not going well? And what do you do in both cases?
Probably we're a little bit less formal right at the moment because of some of the change and the rapid change that we've been in. So, KPIs that we've used to measure products, they haven't always stayed the same, right? So we have higher level strategic KPIs that we use to manage the business. We have OKRs and goals that everybody is sort of aligned to. We have, performance goals within a product line that are kind of the common ones. They look at financial performance. They look at top line and bottom line. They look at impact to strategy, contribution to strategy. They look at, yield, so productive yield, what are we getting out of it? And a number of, even nose counts of things. So like number of products that went into that product portfolio, reducing it down to 125 was a huge goal.
Yeah.
Because as a byproduct, we know we're getting a lot of simplicity benefit. Even if you don't measure anything else, you know that your world on the other end of, going from 1,000 to 100 is a much simpler and much more manageable, much more focused world. So end of life, achievement of end of life. So those are some of the kind of the common ones. I use on the people side, on the people measurement side, I've got a giant set of skills, what I would consider product management skills along a bunch of different dimensions. We just kind of look at, well, where do we think we're at? Self-measurement of where do we think we're at? What are the skills that we think we want to grow into in the next quarter? And how do we want to get there? And we just do a lot of reflection and coaching on that personal growth of where we want to have some focus.
Fantastic. So structure-wise, I would say that those are sort of classic measures, right? There's nothing magic here. It's just
measures.
Yep, classic measures. Okay, and that's sometimes a helpful thing to say to people. Is like, hey, the whole universe doesn't turn upside down. Maybe let's have that be the parting thought. You started a journey like this. What were you afraid was going to happen? What did happen? And what surprised you is like, oh, and what convinced you that you are on the right path?
Yeah, so you're right. The world didn't turn upside down. And I think having an open mind in the beginning, even if you don't necessarily believe or understand fully, but allowing yourself to be, using the trust you have and the respect you have and the relationships you have for the other leaders around you to go in a direction and understanding what those first achievement goals will be, understanding what those impacts will be, watching, measuring, looking at what happens and performs over time. Things don't go perfectly. Things haven't gone perfectly, right?
Right.
So being able to have a voice, the most important thing is being able to be a voice at the table, to be reflective, to course correct, to have open conversation, to not have it be political and siloed, and to still be able to have open conversation and dialogue as you go. I think the first time you start to be able to talk about what's working and what's not working and have an honest conversation and be a part of, okay, well, let's try this and understand that people are listening. I think that's when you buy in even more. It's not when things are going perfectly, it's when they're not going well, but you're able to come together and try to fix it and adjust it and realize, okay, we are all in this together and we're gonna get there. Because you understand that you're stronger than every individual, right? It's all of us.
Yeah. I have been surprised by Lean and especially XP models, how they do allow a group to function almost as a persona itself. If you can keep that group, as you say, relatively open, ability to talk, open to talk about what's really not and is working, then that group can function like a super person, right? It's like all of a sudden you have 5-6 people who can process the problem and in a coordinated way. And so one of the things that I do think that people miss out on when you make a digital transformation that's high throughput is that you will build an esprit de corps. And
that's a huge proof point, right? Again, if all you're doing is looking at numbers that are metrics on pages and you see the little stoplights red or green, that's different from being in the middle of trying to fix something and knowing that your vote and voice count and people are working together to try to fix something. You gain a ton of trust by going through that process, I think.
We'll end it on trust building. Sue Adelmann, VP of Product Management for Customer Experience for the portfolio. Thank you very much for joining the Intrado Way. Terry Miles, as always, a great time. Thanks for joining.
A pleasure.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.